Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam de Boer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are going to be chatting about a parliamentary report exposing Canada's collaboration with China's military on bioweapons research, the questionable conduct of a Liberal MP who now seems more like a criminal than a politician, Canada's failure as the only G7 nation not to reduce emissions despite punitive measures like the carbon tax, the infiltration of Canadian institutions by international criminals and terrorists, and Trump's victory in the 2024 election.
Hey guys, we just launched our Everybody versus Trudeau shirts. They're 100% cotton, super soft, sourced right here in Canada, and all proceeds go to support us at Blendr News and just sort of keep this engine running. So if you like what you see, head on over to www.everybodyversustrudeau.com and get your shirt today.
All right, let's get started. All right, so first off, we've got a parliamentary report revealing Trudeau's complicity in pathogen transfers to China. The Trudeau government allegedly enabled the transfer of deadly viruses from Canada's National Microbiology Laboratory to China's Wuhan Institute of Virology, a lab linked to bioweapons research. Despite warnings from CSIS, the government allowed continued collaboration, reportedly sending pathogens like Ebola and Nipah to Wuhan. A parliamentary report indicates that SARS-CoV-2 samples from Wuhan showed genetic markers matching viruses from Winnipeg, implicating Canada in gain-of-function research. The Trudeau administration's refusal to release evidence and delay in investigations have raised accusations of complicity in a global health crisis, eroding Canada's integrity and drawing outrage over potential treason. So, what's your thoughts here?
I just can't believe that Trudeau's got himself into another, jackpot in general. But this looks pretty clear that Canada is definitely involved in what became the pandemic. And this has been going on for a little while. I remember this information was kind of going back and forth about 6 months ago. We knew that China had access to these labs, but it was more, I think it was more of a clandestine operation in how we understood it originally. But now it seems like they were doing this hand in hand. They were like, yeah, no problem. Here's the information you need. Here's the viruses you need, whatever. And I think the problem you have is maybe not so much on Trudeau and the Coverup, but just in people that operate in these labs and how governments operate in this space, right? They have this feeling like we know better. We can keep this stuff safe. You're all idiots. So just get out of our way. We're going to do this gain of function research so that we're prepared for these pandemics. But when you look at the statistics, over the last 20 years, we've had like 30 of these different lab leaks that have been some very significant, some not so significant. But this happens quite frequently, and it's very dangerous. In fact, if you look at where the large majority of these pandemics or endemics or just any type of spread of a novel virus is what I should say. Actually, the large majority are coming from these labs. These people should not be doing this. They're pretending like they're God, right? So there's two problems here. First is like at that institutional level. Pretending like you should be doing anything with these viruses is ridiculous. How about just leave them alone and don't do gain of function research, because they won't mutate like this in the environment, in the natural environment. And it was something one of the Weinstein brothers said. He goes, look, if you see one thing that's out of place in nature in a virus, then it could very well have come from nature. No problem. These things are gonna. But when you see 7, 8, 10 different things on one specific virus, like they did for the SARS-CoV-2, he goes, it's man-made. He goes, it's 100% man-made. It's impossible for that to have come from nature. I'll take his word for it. I know he knows better than I do in this arena, but just knowing that, you're kind of like, look, you guys can't, I've proven unequivocally that you do not have the capability to do gain-of-function research safely. Just fully stop it. For some reason, they won't. I don't know why, but they won't stop. Maybe it's a nefarious purpose. Maybe it's these people just have a God complex. Maybe they think they know better. It's like people with communism today. We'll just do it better. Yeah. Okay, cool. The other problem you have is, which we're kind of the primary topic here, is how Trudeau has managed this. So the institutional stuff's got to stop globally, but how Trudeau's managed this is like, how much information did you have? What are you doing to try to cover this up? Why are you not expressing any honesty here? Yes.
So like in 2018, CSIS came to him and said, hey, these two scientists working out of the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg have direct ties to the Chinese military through a program that was called the 1,000 Talents Program. And so what China does there is they make it seem like a research and a grant program, like, oh, we just want to develop research with foreign scientists. And so they give these people money, essentially, and then take research that's being done in foreign countries and stealing.
It's blatant espionage.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so CSIS let Trudeau know in 2018 that this was going on with these two scientists. And even after that was when they sent the Public Health Agency of Canada approved sending Nipah viruses and Ebola viruses to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So like they greenlit that even after saying, hey, these people are a threat.
Yes.
And then once the RCMP finally came about in 2019, Trudeau started withholding documents from Parliament, even though they were saying like, hey, you need to let us know what was guiding this decision. Like, where did you at all think this was okay to do? Like, show us the reports here as to where your guys' thinking was at. And they blocked it 4 times. They didn't give it up. Then when the Speaker of the House essentially, I don't know exactly what he did, but it was some sort of like pressure move, as if like, okay, same kind of thing we recently saw where like the House was going to shut down until these reports come about. And then Trudeau sued him. Trudeau sued the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota at the time, the guy who later got thrown under the bus for the whole Nazi thing.
For Hunka, yeah.
Despite the fact that he didn't invite that guy. And so I do wonder whether that's a little bit of political payback in a sense. It was 2 years separated, so who knows? But
Trudeau seems like the guy that would hold that grudge.
Yeah. And then so even after suing him, then, okay, right after that, the whole issue happened. That's when Trudeau called a snap election in 2021 and essentially put all of those investigations on the back burner. And by the time that came around, it was essentially this whole story had just gone away. And so it's insane. Like when you look back, because we even talked about it with Sam Cooper, right? Like, why would he call a snap election? We thought it was because, okay, I have a chance to grab a majority right now. But really, it seems like, oh shit, the evidence that we were participating in the research that led to COVID might be coming out right now. Call a snap election, it all goes away.
Yeah, that's the way it seems now, doesn't it? But again, you kind of look at this and you go, are you ever really going to get this information? Are you going to get the real details? I don't think you do, because I don't think Trudeau walks the earth for much longer if it comes out that he was, if you can factually prove that he was complicit and he was responsible for the pandemic.
Well, we already have, and this is what's crazy is
you do and you don't. So you have like the theory that it's true, but it's like
our parliamentary reports now, like our government has admitted this, like that all of what I just said was in a parliamentary report from the government, signed off by countless MPs. So like they're admitting it, and that's
so they have admitted that they sent over SARS-CoV-2 virus to the Wuhan lab.
So this is the link. It wasn't SARS-CoV-2. So
that's where I'm at.
It's but this is the link is with the Nipah and Ebola viruses.
Yeah.
What was happening was, okay, so in these gain of function labs and this is from a Cornell University study, is in the labs they were working with these highly deadly pathogens, and they made synthetic versions of them, essentially man-made versions of these viruses. And they found traces of those viruses that they got from Canada in SARS-CoV-2 patients.
Right.
Which means it wasn't that they were it's not that Canada sent China COVID-2 samples. It was that they were directly working on the exact same research that led to COVID-2. And the overlap there is that likely the Nipah viruses that they were working with were in direct vicinity with the COVID-19 samples that they were working with. So Nipah virus markers make it into COVID SARS-2 in their laboratory, and then COVID escapes their laboratory.
Yes, right. So just to steelman their side, there's no way to actually prove that the SARS stuff came from Canada, because all we really have is that we've sent them deadly pathogens. They were working with those because there's traces of those in the COVID virus at the same time, right? Is that correct?
So here's how I think about it, because I agree that you can frame it that way, but it would be very similar to being like, okay, we worked on a nuclear energy project with the Soviet Union, and then we realized that that research was directly being used to build a bomb that got dropped and took out a lot of people and caused general chaos within society. It's like you're still culpable if the underlying research that led to COVID-2 was dependent on you giving it to them in the first place.
But then the argument, I think, would be to continue the steelman would be the Nipah virus and the Ebola virus have been around for quite some time. So how can you pinpoint, how do we know anything novel came from Canada with respect to what they used in the Wuhan lab to actually establish, build out the COVID virus? Because those other two viruses have been around for quite some time. They're not necessarily novel anymore, right? So again, you maybe get into this position where it's like, yeah, but everybody had the nuclear technology. So it's like, yeah, okay, sure, they got some blueprints, but, you know, it's been around for, say, 50 years.
So these viruses, Ebola and Nipah, need to be used in, or need to be handled in biosafety lab level 4.
Yeah.
And China at the time did not have one of those. So Canada was not only just sending it to a hostile foreign nation, they were sending it to somewhere that wasn't equipped to deal, like, let's say you're giving them nuclear research that they don't have the capabilities to actually do safely.
Yes.
And so I do see, to me, there is no way that they can really steelman themselves out of this one, because you are giving dangerous research to people that first are hostile to our nation.
Yes.
And second, that don't have the safety measures to deal with it properly.
I think we should, I think you have to qualify this in two ways, though. Is the Trudeau government guilty of what you just said, sending viruses to a place that was not equipped to handle them, so it shouldn't have happened, sending them to places where we knew they had been infiltrated by Chinese government and some form of espionage was going on, and 3, that they're a hostile nation to Canada in many ways? Yes. Agreed. The pandemic, however, we just can't pin the tail on the donkey there. I just don't think we can do it. So I think this is bad enough. This is bad enough on the left side here, the first things we listed. However, when you want to think about pinning them to the wall for the pandemic that just caused so much damage globally, unfortunately, I still think there's a gap that we have to breach that we can't.
There's definitely a gap in the terms of
bridge, rather, yes,
of in terms of, say, laying down a sentence, but as far as starting a trial, 100% there's enough there already. When I did this rant, it went pretty viral, and a lot of people kind of from the space where you'd hear some people be like, oh, this is old news. We knew about this, because this was coming out again. That's why Trudeau called the election, was he wanted to silence all of this. But to me, the breaking story factor here is that all of this is now being admitted to by the government. Everything I laid out there, not the Canada directly responsible for COVID, but Canada was 100% involved in the research that caused COVID. And so with the government essentially taking accountability for that, again, like if you were to go into an abusive relationship with somebody, if you're trying to sit there and go, you're doing this behavior, which is bad, I actually think it crosses a moral, like, say, criminal line. If the person's just sitting there going, no, then you don't really have much to work with. But as soon as now, as of earlier last week, they said, okay, yes, we have been doing this, like, criminal behavior, essentially.
Yes.
Okay, we now have enough to just, like, full-on criminal investigation.
Yeah, unfortunately, with government, you just don't see it, right? It's the same thing as the election interference. It's like, oh, we'll hold a public inquiry in private, and we'll redact 80% of the information, and only liberals are allowed to attend. Oh, and some Chinese people. What the fuck are you talking about? Oh, that's how you're going to do this? It's going to be the same way. And what's interesting with this, not interesting, but what I expect to see if this does go to trial in some sense is that the term national security, everything will be wearing that label. Mm-hmm. It's all national security, so I don't have to disclose any of this information. That's their get out of jail free card, this redact everything card, right? So as long as he's sitting for the next year or so, I'm not going to see anything on it, I don't think. Also, it's really totally fucked up. I agree with you, but I think that's where it's going to die.
The last thing that's crazy about this, that I want to mention before moving on, is how, so yes, he gets noted in 2018 that these people are working with the Chinese military. The the scientist was directly reporting to a military general named Chen Wei, who is the head of China's bioterrorism and bioweapons division. But then, anyways, so takes till 2019, almost actually roughly a year later before they do anything about it, before they take away those people's permissions. They essentially put them on like temporary suspension till to conduct an investigation, and then it took them until 2021 to formally fire them. So 2 years before they actually took away their employment. And in that time, they went back to China, and they're now working with the People's Liberation Army on the exact same research.
Yeah,
so they're
just
doing it there now instead of here.
Yeah. I remember that actually. They just dipped. They had lots of time to be like, okay, cool. I'm just going to pack up, maybe sell the house, maybe take a little vacation, travel around Canada, see what's what, do a little sightseeing. And then they dipped. And they're just like, yeah, we're not coming back. Okay, cool. Good luck, guys. Yeah.
So ridiculous.
This country's so weak.
All right, next story for the day, we've got pandemic profiteering, how a Trudeau minister became tied to fraud and cocaine trafficking. Employment Minister Randy Beausoleil, a Trudeau cabinet member, faces serious allegations of fraud and corruption linked to his company, Global Health Imports. Co-founded with Stephen Anderson, initially launched to supply PPE during the pandemic, GHI allegedly used Beausoleil's political influence to secure funds and engage in deceptive practices. Accusations include falsifying Indigenous status for contract advantages and defrauding companies of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Adding further scandal, Anderson's associate was arrested in a major cocaine bust connecting GHI to organized crime. This case exemplifies a disturbing trend in Trudeau's government, blurred lines between public service and criminality. So is it possible to make a distinction between criminals and politicians anymore?
I mean, there really are some stand-up guys and girls in this Liberal Party these days, aren't there? It's wild to me, but we know that there's been corruption. We know that there's been, taking advantage of a family name. We've seen these things through history. You do it when you have power. You're going to see it no matter what, even if you're not a politician. But there's like these unwritten rules that you follow. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when you were a kid. If you smoked weed, parents knew, but you didn't tell them. You didn't get high in front of them. They just knew, but you kept it to yourself. It was like this kind of understanding. That's how corruption used to work in society. We kind of know what's going on. Everybody's getting paid and all this other stuff. The Nancy Pelosi's of the world. But it's not obvious. This is becoming very obvious. This is becoming blatant. It's not even like, hey, we used our name to then secure these contracts and fulfill them. We used our name just to steal this money. We just used our name to steal $750,000, $1.25 million rather, from just these 3 contracts. We didn't fulfill them at all. Fuck it. Who cares? How do you have the balls to do something like that? That blows my mind. I wouldn't even be able to sleep at night if I did something like that to these people, to anybody rather. And then you look at this cocaine thing and you're just kind of like, yeah, these people, like some of the worst people in society are now running our country.
Yeah.
What is happening?
Yeah. And to build on what you were saying there, like, you look back in olden days and you look back at, say, like Marie Antoinette, that famous quote she had of like, let them eat cake. Like whenever the peasants were complaining about essentially starving, like at least it's like open and honest. Whereas here it's like, oh, we care so much about you. We're such good people. And it's the exact inverse of everything they are.
Yes.
Like, again, I'd rather the devil I know. And with olden, corrupt and dictators and this kind of thing, they would just outright say like, yes, I am like anointed by God to rule over you people. Like I am so great. But then with these people, it's like, oh, we're so kind and compassionate. And then meanwhile, the shit that they're doing behind the scenes, it's like, so there's just that added element of frustration, I think, when it comes to things like this. But really diving into that cocaine bust thing as well is like, because so when you did a video about this the other day that did really well is when people were talking about the cocaine thing. Well, oh, okay, it was Beausoleil's business partner that is affiliated with this person, so that doesn't implicate Beausoleil. And I'm like, okay, first of all, I showed you a picture of Anderson. Like, you look at him, you're like, yeah, this dude is definitely running drugs. Like, there's no chance otherwise. He's like plastic surgeryed out. He's wearing like drug dealer.
He looks
suits.
like a caricature from Saturday Night Fever.
Yeah,
like it's hilarious. Like, what the fuck's going on?
But also, it's to me, so first of all, it wasn't just like a loose connection with this person either. Like Anderson had a registered business with LeBlond, who was the person that got caught with 460 pounds of cocaine.
Yeah, that's the other thing too. It's not like, oh, they had a little sniff in their pocket. No.
Yeah.
No.
We're talking about
They had a boat full. What are you talking about?
A private jet.
Private plane, yeah,
jet.
but still.
And not even, it wasn't even that one instance either. She was also back in 2013. She was part of Edmonton's largest drug bust ever.
Yes, because you could claim, well, I didn't know what she was doing, but 10 years ago, she already got busted for this once.
Yeah.
You know who you're dealing with.
It's the same thing as like dealing with Epstein after he was convicted of sexual acts with a minor or whatever it was.
In like 07 or something?
Yeah. And then so it's like, hey, this is all out there.
Yeah.
And especially if you're doing business deals with the person.
Yes.
You should probably do a little bit of research. And this goes to the same thing that I find with like Bosno is, you know, like I don't know every detail of your life, but at this point with Blendr and like we're pretty interconnected that if you were running around with like international drug smugglers, I'd probably have a decent idea.
You'd be able to sniff it out.
Yeah. Like, you might not tell me directly, but I'd be able to be like, something's not adding up here.
Yeah.
And so the fact that...
Especially if our business was just stealing money from people.
Exactly.
What?
So if both, like, I don't think you can really take moral culpability away from Bosno in this scenario because it's like, at the very least, you're too dumb to realize you're rubbing shoulders with people that are in bed with organized crime.
Yes.
In which case, if you can't tell that from your friends, you probably shouldn't be in charge of our government or employment minister. Yeah. So that's just such a crazy. And actually one of the other things with this as well is, so there was this was a scandal about a year or two ago because after he became employment minister, he had to cease doing day-to-day operations, and but he was allowed to retain his equity stake.
Yes.
Well, after that, after he supposedly stepped away from business relations, it was found that Anderson had been still referencing Randy and within business dealings and all of this. So the question came like, well, this guy is obviously still tied. If you're saying, let me check with Randy, or maybe Randy can get this done for us, that kind of thing, it's showing he's still involved in the operations. And Anderson's defense at that point was, oh no, that's another Randy I work with. And it's just like, okay, yeah, sure. And then, but months after that, after he got pulled into Parliament and they were like, what the fuck is going on here? He admitted, he's like, all right, yeah, there's no other Randy. And then so it's like this whole thing is just, this guy should, like, at this point, again, it doesn't mean that it will get done, but there's at least enough here to put somebody on criminal trial, I think.
Yeah, I think it goes back to our old strategy of minimum 10 years in prison and take all their assets. Yeah. That's it. That's how this goes. We need one of those like Russian prison camps way up north too.
This
100%, dude.
All right, moving on. We've got Trudeau's carbon tax failures. Canada ranks worst in G7 emissions cuts. As Trudeau's government prepares for another UN climate summit, Canada ranks last among G7 countries in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, despite carbon tax imposed on Canadians. The Environment Commissioner's audit reveals Canada is far from meeting its 2030 targets, with no reduction benchmarks for 95% of climate measures. Trudeau is expanding carbon taxes to imports and setting an emissions cap, straining the economy. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith warns emission caps could cost households an additional $419 monthly by 2030. Trudeau's refusal to adapt failed policies jeopardizes Canada's economy and investment, underscoring the need for effective leadership over ideological fixation. So you're a businessman. What happens if an entrepreneur continually doubles down on a failing plan?
They go bankrupt.
Yeah.
They got nothing left. The market doesn't care and you fail. Bye. It's crazy that this guy's allowed to do this kind of stuff. It just goes to show, it's interesting. When I was younger, I used to think you don't want a businessman running your country because you need more compassion and social programs. I think the complete opposite these days. This is a business. the whole country basically operates on economics. Yes, there are social programs, which are part of economics. When you get a guy, and I don't mean to bag on him just for the fact that he's a failed drama teacher, but when you get a guy that's pretty much the extent of his practical education, you can't actually expect him to be able to run a country. It's very complex. It's very difficult. Look, to your point that I've been in business man for a lot of years, I didn't just jump into the big leagues. In fact, I'm not even there. I hope to get there. I continually work harder and harder and work on larger and larger projects with the hope of getting to the big leagues of business. That's what it is. Every entrepreneur, if they're being honest, and they're like me, not just like a manager entrepreneur, they want a 9-figure exit. You want to sell a business for 100 million plus. That's like the dream. That's the goal. You know what I mean? That's the big leagues in a sense. But that we're talking about 100 million, right? And the intricacies and the challenges of building a business to get to that point, that's a lifelong journey. And I may never get there. But then you look at this guy, you give this guy the reins on a country, he's doubled the federal spending to like $500 billion a year from the federal budget. So you just draw a comparison between those two. He's not equipped to deal with the guy couldn't run a convenience store. No offense to anybody that runs a convenience store, but like he couldn't even do that. So the fact that we give him the reins to run this country, like no wonder it's on fire. And then he appoints people that have no idea what they're doing. And people are like, oh, well, it's just a minister position. The Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, has got like a master's in Russian literature. But you get a guy like Jean-Yves Duclos, who I'm not a fan of, but he's actually got a degree in economics. So maybe it would make more sense to put him in that role. I don't know.
No, he's the minister. He was the Minister of Health, John.
So you kind of look at this and you go, these people shouldn't be running this country anyway, A, and B, none of them are qualified to do this. It is a very, very challenging job, and they've done nothing but fuck it up. It's very, very unfortunate. But then more specifically, what else did we think was going to happen with these carbon tax programs? None of them go towards fixing the environment. All they do is cost Canadians more to live, and it's put on things that we can't curb. It's getting cold out. The heat's on. You want me to die? No. Okay, well, I got to get to work so I can pay for all these bills. Do you want me to walk? Well, that's not going to happen. So you start looking at the things that this carbon tax applies to, and it's like, there is no way to slow these things down. They're taxes for no reason. They're almost completely irrelevant for what we could do to curb emissions, right? So you go, I'm not even at all surprised. But I actually, as much as I hate to say this, because I do think it's important to sort of improve the world, leave it a better place. Like I have that mentality. But I do think it's funny that he's got egg on his face because of how hard he's pushing these environmental programs and getting nowhere. So it is good to see, for anybody being objective and paying attention, this guy's a complete moron.
Well, what's crazy is, we say these are environmental policies, but they're not. They're taxation policies.
Yes.
You go look at the budget for, say, things like Parks Canada, of like the bureaucracies that are in charge of directly dealing with the environment and our public lands and such, and their budgets are getting slashed. Meanwhile, they keep taking more and more money in the name of environment. Like, where is this going? And then you see things like the Green Slush Fund, where they had $1 billion budget and $330 million of that was found to be given to contractors with conflicts of interest. So it's essentially just their friends. And then you also see things like, say, for instance, the carbon tax. We're the only G7 country that hasn't actually reduced our emissions. So like, you can't tell me that any of these things are actually dealing with the problem that they claim to. This is essentially the Trudeau strategy: is I'm going to tax and take away all of everybody's resources, and I'm going to redirect them into what will save the planet. And then you look at what he takes all of those taxes for, whether it's carbon tax, capital gains tax. He wants to, go after home taxes now, all of this kind of stuff. And then he just takes that and redirects it into things like the dental plan, or whether it be the foreign aid, the $50 billion we've given to foreign countries and dictators around the world. And so it's like, of course, nothing productive is going to happen here, because you're taking money from places that people desperately need, like, say, carbon taxing. That's them heating their homes, driving their cars, all of this kind of stuff. And then you're putting it into essentially luxury beliefs. You're sacrificing all of the necessities, and you're taking away, making it harder for people to afford those in order to chase all of these luxuries. It's like, of course the country is going to fall apart.
Yeah. So basically, our environment's getting worse because Trudeau's taking all of our money and lighting it on fire.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good shortened way of saying that. He's like the Joker from that scene in The Dark Knight where he just burns the money. He's like, it's not about the money, it's about sending a message.
Yep. Oh God.
All right, moving on to tax dollars for influence. BC politicians' troubling ties to the Chinese Communist Party. A report reveals that David Eby, then BC Attorney General, approved a $20,000 grant to the Canada Committee 100 Society, or CCS 100, in 2021 for diversity initiatives, despite concerns over CCS 100's ties to Beijing's United Front, which seeks to expand Chinese Communist Party influence abroad. CCS 100, involved in election mobilization and voter education, supported Eby's campaign financially, raising fears about foreign influence in Canadian politics. A CSIS document and intelligence assessments indicate CCP-linked proxies are manipulating Canadian elections. So, do you think compromised leaders are blind to CCP influence or just complicit for political gain?
Absolutely complicit for political gain. This is ridiculous. Like, don't get me wrong. I think there are probably a few politicians that don't know they're being manipulated on the back end because of maybe China just doesn't like their opposition. You know what I mean? So they don't really need that political MP or leader to get into bed with them as much as they just smear the other person's name. That can happen. But I think for the most part, especially with Eby here, he's in bed with these people, 100%. You know what I mean? And I think we have unequivocal proof that that's the case. And you see stuff like this, it's like, okay, so you're just cutting these guys a grant or a check for 20 grand and they're funding your campaign. I don't know what else you need to see. It's very obvious. The bullshit that I'm so sick of is the fact that we all know it's happening. We all just have to let it happen. What do we need to put into place to bring this institution or these people down? You know, and again, I think I go back to penalties. I think that's the easiest thing. Like, hey, first of all, we need a third-party group that can do investigations, that is privy to, has access to everything. I don't give a fuck what you say. They'll sign whatever you need, but they need to be able to see everything that's going on behind these closed doors. Canadians deserve that. And the second thing is incredibly harsh penalties for shit like this. And, you know, I think there's like a sliding scale. You know, you steal someone's money, you steal taxpayer dollars. Like I said, minimum 10 years. If you're complicit with a foreign government to rig elections, minimum life sentence. I'm out. I'm done. You know, if the guy from Roxham Road gets a life sentence with no parole in the States because he built a website, sure, some nefarious shit, but the FBI was all involved in that anyway. Life without parole, that's what you get.
I think they're complicit, but I also don't think they acknowledge the reality of the Chinese Communist Party, despite the fact that communist is in their name, which is so wild. But I sent you that article earlier this week about the Trudeau family history with China and just their views on them, and how Pierre Trudeau wouldn't speak out back against the when the Tiananmen Square crackdown, you know, when they rolled in tanks on peaceful protesters, kind of like a echo of the Freedom Convoy, obviously not with tanks, but shutting down peaceful protesters and sending a message that, hey, we're not a democratic nation. You guys do what we tell you to do. Even after that, Pierre Trudeau wouldn't say anything and took Justin and the rest of his family to China and essentially said, like, China is the future. And even Trudeau's brother is quoted in that article pretty much saying, like, oh, yeah, sure, there was some negative aspects of the whole Chinese Communist Revolution, but, you know, at the end of the day, it industrialized the nation and they wouldn't be where they are now without it. That's the whole you can't make an omelet without broken eggs argument. And it's like, we're not talking about broken eggs. We're talking about humans, and they killed 40 million of them minimum. That's not just something you can gloss over about being like, oh, yeah, sure, there was a few bumps in the road, but look where we got. It's
the
like
entire population size of Canada.
Yeah, you're like, yeah, essentially like entire nation. Yeah, dead. Yes. And so then you look at people like, say, what Pierre Trudeau was indoctrinating his kids with this view of China. He told them that, oh, we can't judge their way of life. Like, we can't force our culture onto them. This whole, you know, cultural relativism idea where one culture isn't superior to another, therefore you can't impose your cultural standards on another culture. It's like, no, they killed 40 million people. Like, you can definitely...
There is a difference between right and wrong.
You can definitely be like, that culture sucks. And it was the communist culture, the cultural revolution that Mao led, which caused all of that. But anyways, where I'm going with all of this is like, if you look at China like a wolf in sheep's clothing, I think people like Trudeau and EB genuinely only see the sheep. They see the clothing, but they don't acknowledge that there is a wolf under that at all. And so they think they're just like, oh yeah, it's like they're kind of like us. They're trying for the same things. It's like, no, that's not what the Chinese Communist Party is like at all. So they will work with these people thinking they're fellow sheep, because that's what EB and Trudeau are like. They're not. You look at those people, even you look at them from like a structural point as far as like physiology, you're like, you're doing whatever the strongest person in the room tells you to do, and that's China right now.
Yeah,
and so like I think some of it is just them like falling for this romanticized version of what China is, and then being like, oh, we're allies.
I would agree, except that I think there's too much contrary information available. There's too much bad, especially for Trudeau. EB, you can make the argument perhaps. For Trudeau, he knows what's going on with China. He knows all the bad things that they're doing. He knows about election interference. He knows about the drug trade. He knows about their organized crime. He knows about their infiltration of the CBSA. He knows about the fucking lab leak stuff. He knows about all these things. So he's just choosing that the good outweighs the bad and suits his agenda. And I think all these people have this odd God complex that they just know better. They're going to do what's better for us because they're a more superior being. So they can behave this way and they can crack 40 million eggs if they need to. I think these people need to be ended.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, because, hey, and this goes to that, like that idea of, we were talking about leaders of a country and say a businessman, and like people will say, and you know, you can get out of hand with the typical like strongman leader, the Mussolini types, or whatever.
Sure.
It can go too far. But at the same time, like, this is something that I think about on a geopolitical level, or say dealing with other hostile foreign nations. This is what I think Trump does bring to the table really well, is those leaders, when Xi Jinping sits down across from Donald Trump, there is a little bit of like, oh, I need to be on my back foot and like actually be afraid of the actions you might take against me. But then like sitting across the table from a Trudeau or a Kamala Harris type or a David Eby type or any of these types of people, like even just, you know, we've talked about this from like literally just a biological level.
Yes.
This is a great example, is that viral clip of when they were at like a G20 summit and Xi Jinping was essentially reaming Trudeau out for the fact that a detail that he thought was being kept confidential between the two of them ended up getting leaked to the media.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see in that entire
interaction
that Trudeau is just terrified of this man, that he's just like, oh yeah, that shouldn't, okay. And like, he's just completely like anxiety ridden by him. And it's like, in that scenario where you've got somebody like Xi Jinping, like a hostile nation, like you need to be able to stand your ground and be like, no, fuck off.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Trump would be like, "Shut up, ping pong."
Yeah,
it's not happening. Like,
exactly.
Like,
you need that.
Yeah.
You need that, because that energy flows down to everything with how that China is now going to deal with Canada.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things will still happen in the background, but they'll have to be deceitful about it and they'll take another path. I do think, though, yeah, you look at EB and Trudeau, they're effeminate dudes. I mean, they're going to get steamrolled. Like, you know, just sitting across from people, when you see someone weak like that and your goal is power, you know you're going to be able to take it. I totally see that. That being said, I do think the majority of these leaders that are involved with the CCP, I do think they know what's going on. And I do think they're doing it just for their own political gain. I do think they're doing it for power. I think that continuously power corrupts, as we know. Absolute power corrupts, absolutely, sure. But I think that people in these roles will continually choose power and profit over the people. And you see this constantly with the policy they pass and the things that they do. It's not just working with China, it's everything else these people do. It's all about saving face. It's all about their own form of diplomacy. And it's all about power and profit over people. It's just what it is. It's a rotten institution.
You know what? I actually here's where I think both of our views actually kind of bend in where they're not actually mutually exclusive as to whether they're complicit or whether they're incompetent. But so I think if I was just zooming out, this is probably how it unfolded. Is these leaders, the idealistic types that are weak and just think that everyone will get along if we all just hold hands, they fell into a trap set by China in the first place, which was like, yeah, let's work together on saving humanity through this research for for viruses, or let's work together on climate change, and we're going to save the world together. And these people being incompetent were like, yeah, sure. And then they get in and they start doing that, but then they get compromised to a point where then they realize, they go, oh shit, this is different than what you guys sold me. You guys were stealing our bioweapons research, or now you guys are interfering with our elections. And now I'm caught in a scheme that shows my stupidity, but my only choice now is to continue with it because otherwise my career is dead. So they kind of get like honeypotted. We see that even that was the whole thing with the underground casino that the Chinese narco groups were running, right? They compromised Canadian politicians in them. It's like their incompetence gets them into a scenario where the nefarious bits reveal themselves, but then once that's been revealed, they're essentially they're
too late.
They're in the game at that point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that probably happens quite frequently as well. You kind of don't know who you can trust and you get in there and it's too late. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I still think there's no excuse for it. I agree. I think that people need to, like, this came out the other day. What's his name? Cuomo, who was in CNN, who was talking all that shit. This is an odd example, but I was just listening to it the other day. Talking all that shit through COVID, saying all these things and blah, blah, blah. Obviously he's not with CNN anymore. And he was doing a debate with Dave Smith. And what's interesting is he had an opportunity to say, you know what? I thought CNN had the best, analysis, the best scientists, the best reporting. I went with what they said. Yes, I worked for them, so I was definitely having to toe that line to a certain degree, but honestly just trusted that they knew better. Now I understand they don't. Let's move on. But he couldn't do it because that would have been like, that completely disarms the thing right now. You say, okay, my fault, this, whatever. We are where we are now. Let's move forward. You have these opportunities to make the situation right. But instead, he doubled down. He doubled down and went on the attack and just looked like an absolute retard. Got shredded. It was one of the worst debates I've ever heard in my life. You know what I mean? So this is exactly the same thing with politics. Is it's like, hey, look, if you just admit, like, hey, I've made a mistake. Here's what's happened. Here's what we understand, blah, blah, blah. People have compassion and understanding. People are decent. You know what I mean? But if you just continue to double down and double down and double down because of like you said, that there's no other way through, or I want to maintain this profit and this power, you're the worst kind of human.
I agree. And, even though I'm trying to paint the picture that a lot of the reason that these people are doing these things is out of incompetence and negligence rather than some grand scheme per se, isn't to rid them of culpability for these crimes and these issues. Like, again, even in a criminal court case, you can't plead incompetence or negligence if your actions led to a criminal act.
Of course.
So that's not a defense.
Yes.
So I'm not trying to take away guilt from them at any means. Just kind of what got us into this scenario.
No, I agree. I agree with you. And my perspective is that I do agree with you, but I also think that there's a right path forward and a wrong path forward, and they continue to take the wrong path.
I agree.
And they do know what's up.
All right, moving on. We've got from terrorist to teacher, the rot in Canada's institutions worsens. Canada has become a haven for international criminals, with figures like Hassan Diab, convicted by France of a deadly bombing, teaching at Carleton University. This reflects a broader pattern. An ISIS operative was granted citizenship in Canada. Transnational crime networks have infiltrated institutions, and political leaders are linked to CCP-connected illegal casinos. These cases, alongside Canadian banks implicated in laundering fentanyl profits, expose a leadership prioritizing ideology over security, compromising national safety, and making Canada vulnerable to foreign influence. Has it always been like this, and we're only becoming more aware of it? Or is it actually getting a lot worse?
I think it's actually getting a lot worse. And I think DEI plays a significant role. That's what I actually think. I also think globalization's played a significant role in this as well, right? Because every nation seems to have a vested interest in every other nation in some way. And the way that we're doing a lot of these things is through espionage and infiltration. It just seems to be the strategy, right? I mean, I'm sure it's been happening. That's probably been happening on a pretty large scale since, World War I, maybe World War II, but now it's just everywhere. And it's not just war, it's every organization, it's every political party, it's every major corporation, you know what I mean? And they're all compromised in some way, shape, or form. I also think, this is kind of an offshoot thing, but and I'm not excusing it, but you also, in the 50s and 60s, you could have single income, have a couple kids, and be able to afford a home and cars and a life. Now you can't afford anything. So now everybody's just like, there's not enough money for anybody. There's this massive scarcity mindset that has infiltrated society in a lot of ways. And I also think that plays a role. You get this is why you see money laundering at banks. This is why you see complicit, people at Service Ontario or to the CBSA or whatever it is. I think there are multiple reasons why these things are happening. And I think by all counts, it's getting worse.
Yeah, because the people that are in charge of, say, understanding when institutions are being, say, taken advantage of by hostile foreign groups, whether they be terrorist or criminal, drug traffickers, this kind of stuff. Those same people have created the narrative that any questioning that people from the other side of the world would ever do anything criminal is racist. So you can't say that, okay, Chinese narcos have infiltrated our institutions because, well, that could end up causing anti-Asian hate, right? And so they've essentially shot themselves in the foot from even dealing with this problem. But then I do tend to think as well, I'm on the same boat as you, that these things are just genuinely getting a lot worse. I mean, we even saw too, right? Reports of human trafficking are up by 400% in Canada. Violent crime is up 50% since Trudeau became prime minister. So we've got genuine metrics now to push along with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And, this goes to something I was thinking about the other day was there was a minute where there was a trend of videos going viral of, like, say, cars in Brampton driving on sidewalks and stuff, right? And I thought to myself, like, okay, how often is this really happening? And then I was walking down here just like 2 minutes away from the house, and I saw a Amazon courier van with two, but they seem to have been new to Canada.
Brampton looking folk, got it.
And just on the sidewalking path that is like a good 15 to 20 feet away from the road even. And both of them just looked like, how did we get here? Just super panicked and stressed. And it was just funny because it literally happened the exact same day I was telling myself, no, this isn't happening as often as people make it seem. I actually do think that if we were to conduct open investigations into some of these institutions, whether they be, especially the universities, places that these DEI initiatives are running rampant, which would be public sectors as well as, say, universities and such, I think, you would see that it's a lot worse than we're being led to believe, even because, even that, like, it was like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, they found Service Ontario employees helping criminal rings get
carjacking.
Just be like, all right, well, we'll approve or manipulate that VIN number so that you can get a sale permit for it, whatever, this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. If you are, to my previous point, if you are looking at this from a globalization perspective and that there's a vested interest in each country because of their resources or political clout or whatever it may be, right? So we understand that, and we understand that this has been happening for 100 years anyway, right? So let's just say at least as far back as World War I. So let's just say that. Because the geographical makeup of the world is pretty similar. Cool. So we understand that. And then a country like several countries in the West say, we are going to prioritize DEI programs. We're going to hire foreign people. We're not going to hire anybody domestic, nobody white. We're only going to hire people from other countries, and we're going to open our borders and you can pour in en masse. So now you go back to the first point, infiltrating other governments and other countries because we have a vested interest. And now you look at their new programs. So what do? You turn on the tap to full. You fill as many of their institutions with your people as you possibly can for whatever your vested interest may be. We are setting ourselves up for failure. our government policies are ridiculous and this country is falling apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy too when you realize that, say, certain nations are even using our country, Canada, as a battleground now between their things like India and Pakistan.
Yes, exactly.
You've got Indian organized crime now. Like, for instance, the largest drug super lab bust was the main guy that was implicated in that was from a Punjab drug group linked to Mexican cartels as well. But then you've got the Pakistani intelligence funding the Khalistan movement in Canada in efforts to try to destabilize the Indian government. And so you've got these like interwebs of like Indian organized crime is killing essentially Pakistan operatives in Canada. And it's like, what the hell is going on, dude?
And you've got massive Chinese influence in organized crime here as well. You've got the cartel involved already. Like, you just look across the board, it's like the Italian mafia is like, they're not even players anymore. They used to be the guys. What's going on? My people, what are you doing?
We're so dumb. We're so dumb. All right, last story for the day. We've got Trump wins the 2024 election. In a stunning political comeback, Donald Trump triumphed over Kamala Harris in the 2024 election, capturing not only the presidency, but also control of the Senate for the Republicans. Since his victory, notable developments including a surge in the stock market, a significant drop in border migrant caravans, and peace initiatives with global conflicts. Trump has made strategic appointments, including a new chief of staff, a new border czar, and has influenced policy changes in New York regarding immigrant benefits. His administration has also pushed for increased domestic production by U.S. companies. This has led to a mix of reactions globally, with some nations seeking to realign their policies in anticipation of America First 2.0. So what's your thoughts on the election win in the first few days of fallout from it?
So it looks like the Republicans are also going to win the House. So they're going to have a clean sweep, which I think is going to be important for all the things that Trump wants to implement. So there's a couple of big things here. First, I think this is exactly what America needs. I'm not the biggest fan of maybe Trump as an individual sometimes, but I think that America has become a mess and it's a dirty job, and you need a guy that can get in there and get that done. I also think America was at the top of the world as a superpower for since World War II, and they're losing their place. So you need a guy to step back in and put his foot down and go call ping pong by his nickname and go tap the guy from Saudi Arabia on the arm again, even though you're not supposed to touch him. Do all these things and sort of reestablish yourself. And again, I said this the other day. I think it's less about Trump, more about it not being Biden and Harris, not being weak, feeble people you can run over at the table. It's some guy that will stand up for himself, right? Because they still always have the firepower. But anyway, I also think America's got this opportunity. I think America's in the same position as Canada in the sense that if they don't correct course over the next few years, they're too far gone. In a lot of ways, I think they're already too far gone, especially with their public health. 50% of Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic. 77% of military-age men are unfit for service. 70% are overweight. 45% are obese. You kind of look at these figures and you're just like, their health crisis is very, very real. I use that as an example of a lot of other things that, Trump is trying to fix with immigration, with, RFK, he just got appointed to a position where he's going to oversee all of these things. The CDC, the FDA, all this stuff, which is great. I think him having a less official role is important because I think he's got more flexibility to do more good, RFK in this case. I think, you and I talk about this frequently. Global GDP is going to drop because of a population decline. And I think you need to figure out a way to live in this, in where the world is going. And I think that you do need to do more domestic production, more domestic manufacturing. And I think America is now going to move in that direction. I think it's very important that they do this because North America is actually in a really good position to thrive in whatever this, world 3.0 might look like. So I'm glad that he's doing these things. It is important. I think it'll bring more stability to the world. Again, it's because you have this guy at the table and he can't be run over. America has been sort of dictating a lot of global policy for a lot of years, and it's been very weak. Not only over the last 4 years, but Trump did what he could in his first 4. He knows he made a lot of errors. I can appreciate him saying as such, etc. But then before that, you had 8 years with Obama, and you look kind of his track record, you're like, just kind of blew some shit up. I recognize that that's a little hyperbolic and over the top, but you haven't had a leader at the table that's been America first for quite some time. So I think that that's important. I also think it's going to make this Western liberal order fall. I think you're going to see a lot of these things, a lot of these DEI policies going to fall apart. He's putting his foot down on a lot of this shit, and I think you're going to see the same thing. I think it's going to give countries like Canada hope, like, hey, look what Trump's been able to do, because he'll have about a year before we do our elections to be like, this is the way, this is the right path. And you're going to see more of, you're going to see sort of a right-wing wave try to correct course in the world, because I think it's exactly what we need. And, final thing that I'll say is, we don't know how this is going to play out, but a lot of these guys that are looking at like a lot of these proxy wars that are happening, I don't want to give him credit necessarily for stopping World War III, because A, you could argue that it's not here, and B, you could argue it's going to happen anyway, for sure. But when you got Russia and Ukraine both actively saying, okay, let's have a chat, we'll maybe talk our way through this. When you have Hamas saying, okay, look, let's find a way to stop this war.
And Qatar kicked out Hamas too.
Yes. So when you look at that, you kind of go, by all accounts, this is moving in the right direction. I just hope he can put his money where his mouth is. And I hate to say this, I hope he can survive.
I do appreciate the fact that he admitted in his last term that he was kind of in over his head, that yes, there's a lot that you have to learn on the fly. And I was kind of, you have to make like hundreds, if not thousands of appointments for people to like where they're going to work, who you're going to put in what position. And I kind of just listened to the insiders, and, that ended up backfiring on me, putting wrong people in wrong places. But then like, I do wonder, like, okay, how much did you learn about that? Because there's a lot of, a lot of speculation, and it might have even actually happened today where he was talking about appointing Marco Rubio. It's like, this is a warhawk neocon that is part of the machine. He always has been. Like,
in what role?
Secretary of State. So like his essentially foreign policy front man.
I thought he put a woman in as the in foreign policy.
No, it was chief of staff was the.
I know. I think he put another. I think he did something today too, that he put a. I think he put another woman in a position that had to do with foreign policy.
No, I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, Marco Rubio has been chosen as Secretary of State. But one thing that I thought was very interesting as well in the fallout of Trump being elected was the independent left-wing media all started shitting a brick because their subscriber bases were dropping. So David Pakman, he's a very prominent left-wing commentator, and he made a like 10-minute video essentially like freaking out about the fact that he lost 5,000 subscribers in a day, and being like, this means that the left is going to become like apathetic and withdraw from politics, and this is how they're going to win. And when you can see this, whenever Trump takes a blow in battle, like with the lawsuits and all of this, the right just becomes more mobilized. That's what we need to do. We can't back down, and please buy my book while you're at it and all of this kind of stuff, right? But what I was thinking, I can't remember who I saw mention this, but I was like, oh, that is actually very interesting. Is like, I wonder how much of the left-wing media apparatus was being propped up as a way to kind of show false support for the left wing, being like let's say buying views for YouTube or comments or subscribers or this kind of thing. Like, let's say the DNC was boosting these independent media channels, like with bots, essentially.
Yes.
To try to make it seem like their narratives had more appeal than they did. And you can even see, like, it's very similar to how leading up to the election, you would see all the mainstream media outlets in the polling be like, oh, it's neck and neck, it's 50-50, but then it was a landslide, right? So it's like, all right, how much of these things is just completely fabricated? Like there isn't actually the support. And what the DNC is realizing now is, well, us spending all of this money and resources into boosting these media channels and making it seem like these narratives have more appeal than they do isn't beneficial. It's not going to do anything for us anymore. So maybe they just pulled all of that at the same time, because it doesn't make much sense because one of the things that Pakman was saying in this rant was that, like, this was happening across all left-wing commentators like Sam Cedar and the Young Turks and such and such. So it's like, it doesn't make sense that all at once, all these different YouTube channels would see a vast drop in engagement and followership.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think that the entire Democratic campaign was a house of cards. I think it was just propped up. I think you were just seeing like a fake town built with just a frame.
Right.
And I think that's what it looked like.
I agree.
Because when you look at the scatter map of cities, and I don't want to get into election interference so much, but when you look at the scatter map of cities that voted Democrat versus the states, it's alarmingly small. Like very, very few places seem to be voting Democrat. America wanted a Republican
president. It was pretty
president.
much the main cities, and that's it.
That's exactly it. And there was also the argument to be had, and I'm gonna sort of steelman their side again, is people are saying, well, the only states Kamala won are states that you don't need voter identification. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate. I think it seems mostly accurate if it's not 100%. But also, a lot of those were Democratic strongholds too. So, that being that, but that, so I think they would have won there anyway. But that being said, I think the Democratic Party needs to go rebuild. I think they've become the Liberal Party of Canada. They just did a better job of making themselves seem like a formidable competitor, but they weren't. They're not. America doesn't want them anymore. They've ruined the entire country. See, this is the benefit when you have sort of equal representation or somewhat representation on both sides in the media, or at least from the people. In Canada, we don't. We have what? We have the National Post, and then we have offshoot platforms. You don't really have anything that's right wing. So you don't really get right wing media. It doesn't really get out there. Whereas in America, that it was able to flourish. And what they were able to do is highlight all the terrible things the Democratic Party had done to America over the last several years. So it becomes very apparent to people. So what happens with us though is, they just tell you one side of the story and it's a complete lie, but that's the only truth you have. So it does affect the older group of, Canadians, like maybe our parents or something like that. But what's interesting is the corollary effect in polls in Canada. They are not able, for some reason, the Liberals are unable to manipulate it so that they seem like a competitive force, even though they have more control over the media. So it's kind of this weird, it's sort of weird imbalance. But anyway, like they're gonna, it's my opinion, long story longer, the Democrats, very much like the Liberals, are in a big rebuilding phase. And I think you just saw that. I think you saw them just get absolutely crushed. And maybe that's why they put Kamala in there going, we're not going to win anyway. Maybe they knew what we didn't know. Or maybe they tried their best and thought maybe they were just so cocky like they were when Clinton was running against Trump originally, because Obama swept through everything and they didn't even worry about the swing states. So they had this strategy like, we've got elections figured out. We're good. It was cocky and arrogant. And that's why they lost. So maybe they did the same thing. I don't know which, but in either case, this happened for a good reason. The Democrats need to go rebuild. It's not to say they can't be a reasonable party in the future and provide good solutions for the American people, just like the Republicans could eventually be the biggest problem in the world, like the Democrats have become. But in today's society, this is what needed to happen. And I think it's funny. It's not only America's best opportunity to correct course and try to improve their country and have a strong future. I actually think it's what's best for the West. So we'll see how that kind of permeates into other, liberal cultures.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can subscribe and support the show and get access to our newsletter, which goes out 5 days a week, as well as original articles. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.